Okay, welcome back, everybody. We're going to have our last topic here with Brian Whipker talking about application methods, focusing on substrate drenches and bulb soaks. After this, we'll have about 15 minutes of question and answer with both Brian and Joyce. Before we go any farther, I do want to thank Fine Americas for their sponsorship of this eGrow webinar called PGR University. It's a huge thing for them to be able to sponsor this and make this available free of charge to the growers out there listening. If you haven't downloaded any PDFs for this, feel free to go to the materials tab on your control panel and download the PDF so that you can follow along and use these for notes. Without any further announcements, I want to welcome back one more time Brian Whipker from NC State University, as he will talk about substrate drenches and bulb soaks. Brian, let me go ahead and mute you. There you go. You're ready to go.
Okay, I think I'm here. Just one correction is Joyce Latimer is after me for another 20-minute talk.
Sorry.
So she's coming back, and then it's going to be questions. So Joyce covered the concepts of foliar sprays and liner soaks. So the other primary application methods that we look at is drenches and bulb soaks, and that's what I'm going to talk about in this section of the presentation. So when you see the two options, it's substrate and bulb soaks. By far, substrate drenches are being used, and I want to cover that in more detail. I'm really only going to talk a little about bulb soaks because it's pretty specialized, and there are fewer people who are actually growing bulbs. So when we look at drenches, it's the application of a PGR solution to the substrate. That PGR solution binds to the substrate, and then usually it's released over time. And so we then have some absorption of that PGR by the roots, and so we get the growth control on that plant. So of the chemicals that we had, both the anti-GA types and the structural type, there's a number of them that are suitable. Those are the ones that have not been have a box over them, because dimenazide has no activity. GA, actually I have to admit I don't know if it does, but I didn't see the kind of ponder the significance of doing it, because you want the stems or the cells to elongate, so you probably need to be applying it to the stems. And then, as I said in the morning session, chlormethoxide chloride is suitable and registered for a drench, but probably not very cost effective. And so what are we left with? Acimidol, fluoroprimadol, Paclo, uniconazole, BA, the combination, Agio, and then Epithon. And of those that are really, let's just say, the ones that are most commonly used or the most suitable for the effects are the ones in the red boxes. Top Fluor, the Paclos, the uniconazole, and Epithon by far are the primary ones used by the industry, and they work very well in a lot of applications. So why use a drench? There's some advantages there. Because you're usually adding a drench with sufficient volume of water, and it goes over the root system, you have a very uniform response. Unlike maybe sometimes a spray application, if there's a shoot underneath the canopy, it does not get hit as well. You're not going to have that translocation and control, then that plant can become uneven. Also with the drench, because it is absorbed and then released, you usually have some more long-lasting control. And there's also the advantage that some of these low-dose drenches that can be made late in the season will control growth, even if you're using like 0.1 part per million, and then you don't affect flowering or bract development. So you can get the control you want without having the negative effects on flowering. So it works very well. But with that comes some disadvantages. The biggest one is, if it's not registered for the chemical to be going through chemigation, is the labor. The labor to apply it. It's much quicker to apply a foliar spray than a drench. And you can have some decreased efficacy if you're using a mix that's heavy in bark. typically we say you got to increase the rate by about 25%. And sometimes if you get too high of a rate, you prevent growth from occurring on that plant. So the keys here for drenches is to identify the proper volume that needs to go on to different pot sizes. You need to apply it when the substrate is not saturated. It's a little on the dry side. It needs an irrigation so it can be absorbed and retained in that pot and not drain out the bottom. But it can't be too dry because otherwise it might channel along the outside and out to the bottom. And like I already said, if you have a heavy amount of bark, sometimes it can tie it up, and so people sometimes increase the rate about 25%. But if you're doing sub-irrigation, you can use a lower rate because, you know, a sub-irrigation, what's the wicking pattern? The wicking pattern is things move to the top, so you're not having a leach through of some of those chemicals, so you can lower the rate and get very good results. So the guidelines are out there. It's on all the labels for the drenches that you need to match up the number of fluid ounces with the pot size, and typically that goes up, or it does go up. With the bigger the pot, the more solution you add. Again, to get that uniform coverage and distribution inside that pot. That's why we're using that higher rate. So when you look at volume for these soil active PGRs, the volume does depend on this method, and it's critical that you have the right amount of volume to get that uniformity and response. So volume can also be used in some cases as an application tool, in that if you want to add a little more volume, what are you doing? You're adding more chemical, so you'll get more control. Whereas on some cultivars that might be less are very reactive, and you want to use a lower dose, you can lower some of the volume. So when you're doing the application, you can customize it with only having to make one solution. You customize the rate, the ultimate dose you give that plant by changing the amount of volume of water that you're applying. So here's some results that we had with Top Floor a few years ago. You see the response of increasing rate of foliar sprays from 0 to 50 on the top photo, and the bottom photos the drench application. So you can see, you know, you get in many cases a little more control with a drench than you do with the foliar spray. Here's some of Joyce's work looking at sprays, the untreated control at the left, a spray of 160 parts per million of piccolo, and then drench rates increasing. So, you know, it's a little extreme on some of the rates, especially on the far right side. This is only 3 weeks after treatment, but you can see the effects and going on, so drenches have some activities. Here's some work, or here's actually the plants a little later. 6 weeks, so you can see that like the 8 part per million drench held back that plant. It's nice and compact, whereas the other rates were a little on the excessive side. Showed this slide earlier. Here's Drench Summaries of for this one cultivar, Summertime Sunset. Top Floor drenches applied 1 part per million before vernalization began, and then I should step back, before chilling period began, because vernalization implies you need the cold temperatures to induce flowering. That's not the case. You kind of sink it is what you're doing. So when cold temperatures began, 1 part per million drench was added, and then when we increased the temps after about a month, I believe, we added another one. So Top Floor worked great. Sumagic works for a drench, more responsive effect that occurred here with the pink charm, that you can see the effects going on. So very, very much a suitable application method. Top Floor drenches here, looking at Stargazer Lilies, looking at probably 0.25 milligrams AI as being a good rate to hold the plants down and get good coloration on those. I showed this earlier in the morning, concise drenches, just to hold down that stretch in post-harvest with concise, using the rates in the middle range that's there. Top Floor, we did the work looking at caladiums. 1 to 2 milligrams AI is good. Very similar rates for a Paclo product, but interesting enough, this a caladium is one of the few plants where a uniconazole does not really work. It's probably the only one I know of that's out there. So anyway, you need to use a Paclo or a top floor for caladiums if you want to control some of that stretch going on. And here we are with tuberous dahlias. You can see the rate response as you control growth between 1 and 4 milligrams AI. So I want to shift gear just slightly and look at Collate Drenches. And so really it's Epithon that we're looking at. So there are 2 Epithon products. There's Collate and there's Florel. For drenches, we're looking at the rates between 125 and 500 part per million. And so you need to apply it with a similar amount of volume of water as you would with any other drench, and don't have the plant stressed. Now, the label is not quite there yet. The label has been applied so the submission process is starting by FINE that they are going to get they're working to get a substrate label for that product, because right now it's not listed. Only sprays are on the label for what's on the marketplace right now. So we did some earlier work with Florel, but it's the same with Collate. If you get too high of a rate, you might get some lower leaf yellowing, like on the left, and you can have some upper leaf yellowing if it's a little too high. That was with 500 part per million. We only really tried one rate initially, and that's a little much on the control side for this plant. Because we've found that for the most part, 500 part per million, what you use for a spray, you need to half that down. I would highly recommend, if you're going to do a trial, you start with 125. You maybe try 250. But you don't need to go up to 500 parts per million. And Vista bubblegum is a very vigorous plant, so that would be the option for you to consider if you're going to do some trials. And here's some trials we did with geranium. And you can see the growth between 125 and 250 part per million. Gave excellent full plants, good results. Substrate drenches on Coleus, same thing. 125, 250 would be where I look at. So once it's labeled, you're going to have to do some tests to look at optimal rates. There is a lot more variation that goes on as far as the response is concerned based on species and cultivar. Apply a similar amount of water, i.e. like on a 6-inch pot, it's very common on a drench to add 4 fluid ounces. You need to follow that. No stress, and the label hopefully will be out fairly soon, so you can use this with your operation. Now I want to briefly talk about